The wind hit the mountain like something angry that night. Not the kind of cold that bites, the kind that swallows. Snow came sideways across the valley, erasing the tree line, erasing the road, erasing everything that reminded you the world outside still existed. Inside the cabin, the only sound was the fire settling and the occasional groan of old wood holding itself together against the storm. Claire had lived through 3 winters up here. She knew this kind of night. You don't go outside. You don't open the door. You put another log on the fire and you wait. She was almost asleep when she heard it. A scratching sound, low, inconsistent, coming from somewhere near the front of the cabin. She didn't move at first. Probably a branch, probably ice shifting against the truck. The mountains made sounds at night that didn't belong to anything, sounds that new people found terrifying, and that she had learned, slowly, to ignore. Then it came again, and underneath it, so faint she almost convinced herself she imagined it, a cry. Thin and broken and completely wrong for the storm around it. Claire sat up. She pulled on her boots without lacing them, grabbed the flashlight from the shelf beside the door, and stepped outside into something that felt less like weather and more like a wall. The cold hit her face like a closed fist. She swept the beam low across the snow toward the truck. Wind threw white across the light and curtains. She almost turned back. Then she saw the shape, pressed flat against the frozen ground beside the rear tire, so small she'd nearly missed it. A tiny form half buried beneath a shelf of ice that had slid from the truck's wheel well, pinning it down in the dark. She moved closer. It wasn't moving. It might have already been gone. But when the flashlight beam found its face, 2 enormous amber eyes blinked back at her, slow, glassy, exhausted. Whatever this was, it was still alive, barely. Claire reached down without thinking and felt the ice break apart in her hands. The animal was freezing, soaked through. Its breath came in tiny, barely visible clouds that the wind swallowed immediately. She tucked it against her chest and turned back toward the cabin door. She was 3 steps away when something made her stop. She didn't hear anything new. There was no sound that didn't belong to the storm, but she felt it, the specific feeling of being watched. She turned the flashlight toward the tree line. Fresh tracks in the snow, large, spaced wide, coming out of the forest and circling around the far side of the cabin before disappearing back between the trees. Whatever made those tracks had been moving around her cabin recently, very recently. Claire stood there for one long moment, flashlight cutting uselessly into the dark between the pines. Then she went inside and locked the door behind her. She hadn't planned on any of this. That was the honest truth. 3 years ago, Claire had been a different person entirely, working editorial assignments in Chicago, chasing the kind of career that looked impressive in a bio but felt hollow in the chest, the city, the deadlines, the relationship that ended the way long-term exhaustion always ends, not with a single breaking point, but with a slow, quiet disappearance. She'd come up here for a month, to reset, she told people, to finish a personal project, she told herself. The month became a season. The season became a year. The year became a way of living she'd stopped questioning. The cabin suited her grief. That was the honest way to say it. It was small, and it was quiet, and nothing here asked anything of her. She woke up, she made coffee, she drove out before dawn with her camera. She came back, she edited, she slept. Silence had become the only thing that didn't hurt. Now she was sitting on the kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, with a half-dead wild animal wrapped in a dish towel on her lap, and the silence was broken. The kitten, she didn't know what else to call it yet, had stopped shaking by the time the warmth reached it. Its eyes tracked her constantly, not with the soft, unfocused look of a sick domestic cat, with something sharper, older, a watchfulness that felt completely out of place in something this small. It flinched at every sound, the fire settling, the wind changing direction, her own breathing when she shifted too close. It didn't hiss, it didn't cry again. It simply watched her with those flat amber eyes, completely still, like it was calculating something she didn't have the language for. Claire warmed a cloth near the fire and gently pressed it along its side. It tolerated this, barely. She photographed it from a distance while it dried. Something told her she needed documentation. Something told her this wasn't a stray barn cat or someone's lost pet from the valley road. She sent the photographs to Marcus, a wildlife rehabilitator she'd met during a bobcat survey the previous spring. She didn't expect an answer until morning. His reply came in 11 minutes. Claire, do not release that animal. Do not try to feed it yet. Where exactly did you find it? She typed back. Outside my cabin. Storm. It was trapped under the truck. 3 dots. Then, that's a Pallas's cat. A manual. They are not domestic, they are not handleable. They are extremely rare at that elevation. Are you certain you're alone out there? She looked at the kitten. The kitten looked back at her. Outside the window, the storm pressed itself against the glass like something trying to get in. Why? She typed. Because Manul kittens don't travel alone. And if this one was near your cabin, its mother already knows where you are. Claire set the phone down slowly. She walked to the window and looked out into the white dark beyond the glass. She thought about the tracks, the wide spacing, the circle they made around the cabin. She thought about how something had been watching from the tree line while she stood in the snow, and she thought about the look in this tiny animal's eyes, that ancient measuring stillness, and understood for the first time that she had not simply found something helpless tonight. Something had found her. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She dozed in the chair beside the fire with the Manul kitten a few feet away in a lined box, and every time the wind shifted or the cabin creaked she was awake again, flashlight in hand, listening. By morning the storm had pulled back into the mountains. The valley was completely buried. Snow to the window ledges, the truck invisible under a smooth white mound. The tree line stood dark and motionless in the early gray light like it was holding its breath. Claire made coffee and stood at the window for a long time. The kitten was awake, sitting perfectly upright in the corner of the box, watching her the way it had watched her all night. Still, patient, those wide amber eyes tracking every movement she made without blinking. She'd seen that kind of attention before, through a telephoto lens, watching predators in the field, the total focus of something that understood the world as a series of threats and opportunities. Not fear exactly, something older than fear, assessment. She kept her distance, and that seemed to suit them both. Marcus arrived by mid-morning in a truck with chains on the tires and a hard case in the back seat. He stood in the doorway, looked at the kitten, and said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then, I'll be honest with you. I've been doing this for 19 years and I have never seen one of these in a private residence. I didn't go looking for it, Claire said. I know. He crouched slowly a few feet from the box. The kitten's ears flattened slightly. Its whole body dropped an inch, going still in that particular way that wasn't submission but preparation. They don't come to people. They don't come near structures. They are about as wild gets. Then why was it under my truck? Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's the part that concerns me. He examined the kitten from a careful distance. Dehydrated, mildly hypothermic, no visible injury beyond some raw skin near one paw, consistent with struggling against something it couldn't move. Ice, most likely. It got separated, he said. In that storm, in the dark, a kitten this age, it could have wandered from the den site, gotten disoriented, ended up pinned under the runoff ice from your vehicle. He paused. Or, Claire waited, or something drove it out. He told her what he'd told her by message the night before. Manul mothers are intensely protective, intensely secretive. The fact that this kitten had been found this close to a human structure, alone, in a storm, that wasn't typical behavior. Something had disrupted the family. And the tracks I saw, Claire said. Marcus looked at her. Around the cabin, last night, before I came inside. He was quiet for a long moment. She already knows you have it. The next 4 days were strange and quiet, and oddly warm. The kitten recovered faster than Claire expected. It never became friendly in the way a domestic cat becomes friendly. It didn't seek her out, didn't ask for touch, didn't make much sound. But it stopped flattening its ears when she moved across the room. It began eating on the schedule Marcus had given her. It started, gradually, to exist in the same space as her without treating every small movement as a potential threat. Small things, but they felt significant. It followed her sometimes, not closely, not obviously. But she'd move from the kitchen to the back room, and eventually she'd look down and it would be sitting in the doorway, watching. She'd settle at her desk to edit photographs, and 20 minutes later it would be on the floor 3 feet away, facing the window, apparently interested in something outside. It stole things: a glove from the boot rack, a lens cap she'd left on the table, a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket. It didn't destroy them, it simply relocated them to places she couldn't immediately find. She started calling it Ghost. Partly because of the color, that dense smoky gray with the faint darker banding that made it look like something watercolor and half-finished. Partly because of the way it moved through the cabin like it belonged to the walls more than the floor. And partly because of how it felt to have something living quietly in her space again, like something she'd thought was completely gone had come back in a form she didn't recognize. On the 5th evening she was standing at the kitchen window washing the day's dishes when she saw them. 4 shapes at the tree line, small, round, sitting perfectly still in a row at the edge of the forest like they'd been placed there. She didn't move, didn't breathe wrong. 4 Manul kittens, identical in size to Ghost, same coloring, same enormous round heads, same flat-faced stillness. Sitting in the snow at the border of her yard, watching the lit window with the focused patience of something that had been watching for a while already. Behind her, Ghost jumped onto the windowsill. The 4 kittens at the tree line all turned their heads at exactly the same moment. Claire set down the dish in her hand very slowly. Then the 5th shape appeared, larger, moving with a different quality entirely, low and deliberate, the way larger predators move when they are choosing to be seen. It stepped out of the tree shadow and stopped at the far edge of the yard and looked directly at the window. The mother. She was bigger than Claire had imagined from the tracks, dense and low-slung with a tail that curled at the tip and fur so thick she looked almost sculptural in the porch light. Her face was flat and wide and ancient-looking. Her eyes caught the light and held it. She didn't hiss, didn't pace, didn't show any of the agitation Claire would have expected from a wild animal this close to a human structure. She simply stood in the snow and looked at the window for a long time. Then she turned and walked back into the dark between the trees. The 4 kittens remained at the tree line. They sat there for another hour. Claire didn't sleep again that night. She found them the next morning on the porch, all 4, huddled together against the base of the front door in the early gray light, fur dusted with fresh snow, watching her with 4 identical pairs of amber eyes when she opened the door. No mother anywhere, just 4 wild kittens sitting on her doorstep in the cold, waiting. Marcus said it was the most unusual wildlife behavior he'd encountered in 2 decades. He said it shouldn't be happening. He said there was no documented precedent for a Manul voluntarily placing offspring near a human. He also said, don't leave them outside in this weather. So Claire brought them in, and the cabin she had spent 3 years making carefully, deliberately quiet, exploded. There was no other word for it. 5 Manul kittens in a small mountain cabin is not a manageable situation. It is not a heartwarming situation. It is not a situation that lends itself to peaceful reflection or emotional healing or any of the quiet things Claire had come to depend on. It is absolute, relentless, high-speed chaos. They climbed everything, the bookshelves, the window frames, the stacked firewood beside the hearth. They discovered the space above the kitchen cabinets and treated it as prime real estate. They found her camera bag and individually examined every piece of equipment inside it with their paws, which was not something her insurance policy covered. They ambushed each other constantly and without warning from behind curtains, from under the bed, from inside her boots, which she learned the hard way one morning before coffee. They stole things as a coordinated effort. 1 kitten would distract while another relocated the target. She was missing both gloves now, 1 wool sock, a hair tie, the charging cable for her phone, and a photograph she'd printed and left on the desk. The last one she'd taken before leaving Chicago, a city skyline shot she'd never quite known what to do with. She found it later behind the woodpile, slightly damp, 1 corner chewed. She laughed for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember. It surprised her, the way real laughter surprises you after a long absence, sudden and a little overwhelming, like a window opening in a room that's been shut too long. Ghost watched her laugh from the top of the bookshelf, with the particular expression Manul seemed to have permanently, flat, ancient, faintly disapproving, and she laughed harder. But the question that lived underneath all of it didn't go away. Where was the mother? She appeared occasionally at the tree line after dark. Always the same distance, always that same still watchfulness, never coming closer, never retreating fully, leaving no signs of approach except the tracks in the morning. And once, near the porch steps, a small pile of what appeared to be fresh-caught prey, left at the edge of the light. She was still trying to feed them. From a distance she couldn't close. Marcus came by twice that week and stood at the window watching her for a long time without saying much. On his second visit he found something that changed his expression. Wolf tracks, fresh, running parallel to the property line on the north side, cutting close to the area near the den Marcus had identified in the forest. Disturbed snow near the brush line, a dark stain he photographed and didn't immediately explain to Claire. How bad? Claire asked. I don't know yet. He was quiet for a moment. But she's been in contact with something, recently. That night the mother Manul came closer than she had before, all the way to the edge of the porch light. Claire saw her clearly for the first time, and what she saw made her chest tighten. She was thinner than she should have been, moving with a slight unevenness on her left side. Her fur was roughed up along her flank in a way that suggested something recent and rough. She stood in the porch light for just a moment, looking toward the window where the kittens were sleeping in a pile near the fire. Then she set something down near the bottom step, turned, and disappeared into the dark. Claire opened the door carefully. Fresh prey on the bottom step, still warm. She stood in the cold doorway for a long time, looking out into the dark where the mother had gone. She almost missed it the next morning, the way you almost miss the things that matter most when you're not looking for them. She was scanning the tree line with coffee in hand when she saw it. A single dark trail in the snow, irregular, moving from the property line into the tree line, between the pines, heading north, and beside it, running parallel, overlapping at points, the wide, deep impression of something much larger, wolf tracks, following the same direction, into the forest. Claire set her coffee down. She told herself she'd wait for Marcus. She made that decision standing at the window with her boots already on, coat already zipped, the trail in the snow already beginning to soften at the edges as the morning light hit it. She told herself she was not trained for this. She told herself the forest in winter was not a place to go alone following blood trails and wolf tracks. She told herself all the sensible things a sensible person tells themselves before doing the thing anyway. She called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. "I'm 20 minutes out," he said before she finished explaining. She waited 19 minutes. Then she went outside and stood at the trail's edge so she wouldn't lose it. The forest was different in the morning after a storm. Quieter than quiet. The kind of silence that felt pressurized, like the snow had absorbed every frequency except the ones that mattered. Her boots broke through the crust with each step and the sound seemed enormous in the stillness. The trail was clear enough to follow. The blood wasn't heavy but it was consistent, small dark spots at irregular intervals, pressed slightly into the snow, sometimes smeared where something had paused and shifted weight. The wolf tracks ran beside it for the first 100 yards before veering east and disappearing between a dense stand of pine. She stood at the point where they separated and felt something loosen slightly in her chest. Not gone, just diverged, for now. Marcus arrived at the cabin to find her already 50 yards into the tree line. He caught up without saying much, read the trail the way someone reads something they've read before, and fell into step beside her. "She's moving," he said quietly. "That's something. How long ago?" He crouched near a spot where the blood had pooled slightly, where something had rested. "Few hours. Before first light, maybe." They followed the trail deeper. Behind them, back at the cabin, Ghost would not stay in the box. Claire had latched it before leaving. She'd checked it twice. But Manuls are built for confined spaces, for rock crevices and burrow systems in the tight, dark places that larger animals can't reach. And a latch designed for a cardboard box was not a serious obstacle. By the time the cabin was empty, Ghost had pushed the lid, worked the corner, and was sitting on the kitchen floor with the focused stillness of something making a decision. The other 4 kittens watched from the box. Ghost walked to the front door, sat down, looked at it. Then looked back at the box. Then at the door again. Marcus had left it slightly unlatched in his hurry. The ravine appeared without warning through the trees, a sudden drop in the terrain, rocky and sharp, the kind of feature that didn't announce itself until you were close enough for it to matter. Snow had drifted into the lower section, filling the spaces between the fallen rocks unevenly, and it was in the largest of these spaces, half sheltered by a pair of crossed fallen branches that had come down sometime in the night, that they found her. Claire heard Marcus exhale slowly beside her. The mother Manul was on her side in the shallow space beneath the branches, one forepaw extended, her tail curled loosely around her back legs. She was breathing. Claire could see it from 8 feet away, the shallow, uneven rise and fall of her side, the faint cloud of breath in the cold air. But she wasn't moving. She was the particular kind of still that isn't rest. Around her, the snow told the rest of the story. A wide, disturbed area extending back toward the tree line, impressions of something large moving fast, the long drag marks of something that had been knocked sideways and found its footing again, and at the center of it, smaller, precise, the signature of a Manul in full defensive posture, turned to face something much larger than itself in the dark. She hadn't run. Claire stood at the ravine's edge and looked at what the snow was telling her, and felt something move through her that she didn't have immediate language for. Not quite grief, not quite admiration, something older than either. This animal had stood her ground in the dark against something 4 times her size. For kittens already inside a warm cabin a 1/4 mile away. "Okay," Marcus said quietly. shifting his bag from his shoulder. Here's where this gets difficult. It got difficult immediately. The moment Marcus descended into the ravine and came within reach, the mother Manul came back to life in a way that suggested she had significantly more left in her than her condition implied. She came upright fast, backed into the angle of the fallen branches, and produced a sound that Claire had no reference point for, somewhere between a hiss and something lower, more guttural, that seemed to resonate in the chest rather than the ears. Her eyes were fully dilated, her ears flat. Her whole body compressed into the particular shape of something that has made a decision and is waiting for you to test it. "Don't move," Marcus said without turning around, calmly, the way people say things they've had to say before in bad situations. Claire didn't move. He worked slowly, spoke in a low continuous murmur that wasn't words so much as texture, just sound, just presence, just the signal that nothing here was moving fast or without warning. He got the handling cloth positioned, got the case open, made 3 attempts over 20 minutes, each one requiring him to pull back and wait, and start the slow process of resetting the animal's threat assessment from the beginning. On the second attempt she caught his glove. On the third she caught Claire's forearm when Claire stepped in to help from the other side, a fast, precise strike that opened 3 lines through her jacket sleeve and into the skin beneath. Claire didn't pull back. She stayed still and kept her voice low, and kept her eyes slightly averted the way Marcus had told her. And after a moment the mother Manul's attention shifted, moved from Marcus to Claire, stayed there, recalculated something. The pressure eased fractionally, not trust, not recognition, but something, a pause in the decision. Marcus moved in the pause, getting back through the forest with an injured wild Manul in a secured case and a worsening sky, took 40 minutes that felt considerably longer. The clouds had been building since mid-morning, and by the time they cleared the tree line, the light had gone flat and gray, and the temperature had dropped in the specific way that meant serious weather was returning. The first flakes came as they loaded the case into Marcus's truck, not the light exploratory snow of a system moving in from a distance, but the dense, immediate snow of something already overhead. Claire drove her own truck back with the heater on full, and her sleeve rolled up and 3 lines of dried blood on her forearm that she hadn't done anything about yet. Halfway up the cabin road the back wheels found ice. She felt the rear of the truck go light and stepped sideways toward the drainage ditch, and she corrected without thinking, hands steady, no brake, let the wheels find something, and it held, just. She sat with both hands on the wheel for a moment after, engine running, snow coming down hard against the windshield. Then she continued up the road. She found Ghost on the porch, sitting in the snow outside the front door, fur-dusted white, watching the road with the particular manual patience that had stopped surprising her. She didn't know how long it had been out there. She didn't know how it had known to wait. She picked it up without thinking, the first time she'd done that without a specific medical reason, and it allowed this, stayed still against her chest in the cold, looked toward Marcus's truck where the case sat in the back seat. She carried it inside. The night was long and close and difficult. Marcus set up the mother in the largest crate they had, in the warmest corner of the back room, away from the noise and movement of the kittens. She was badly dehydrated. A deep laceration along her left flank that had been partially cleaned, by her own grooming, Marcus thought, over the hours she'd been in the ravine, and 3 smaller wounds consistent with defensive contact, no fractures that he could identify. No signs of internal injury he could assess without equipment he didn't have here. "She needs a facility," he said. "Can she travel tonight?" He looked at the window. The snow was serious now. No. So they stayed. Marcus worked with the focused quietness of someone doing the thing they know how to do. Claire did what he asked when he needed an extra pair of hands, and stayed out of the way when he didn't. She made coffee and forgot to drink it. She sat on the floor outside the back room door, and listened to the sounds from inside, the occasional low warning sound from the mother, Marcus's voice, the muffled storm outside. The kittens were restless, all 5 of them moving through the cabin in a way that was different from their usual chaos, not playing, not ambushing each other, just moving, circling, pausing at the back room door and sitting there for a while, before circling again. Animals know things through walls that people have to be told. Around midnight Marcus came out and sat across from her at the kitchen table and told her what he actually thought. Not what he'd said earlier, which had been the version designed to keep someone functional, the real version. She was severely depleted. The fight had cost her significantly on top of what she'd already spent in the weeks since the kittens had been displaced. She had reserves left, but not many. The night was the critical window. "What do we do?" Claire asked. "We stay with her," he said. "We keep her warm. We keep the space quiet, and we wait." Claire took the second half of the night. She sat on the floor beside the crate in the back room, with a blanket over her shoulders, and the storm working itself against the window above her, and she stayed awake the way you stay awake when something matters too much for sleep to feel acceptable. The mother Manul lay on her side facing the crate door. Her breathing had steadied over the last hour. Her eyes opened and closed at long intervals. She was somewhere between sleep and the particular state that sick animals enter when they are directing everything inward. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Claire became aware that Ghost had come into the room. She hadn't heard it, hadn't seen it move. It was simply there suddenly, sitting near the crate, the way it was always simply there, as if it had always been in that exact spot, and she'd only just noticed. It sat for a while, then it moved closer, then closer still, then it pressed its small nose against the mesh of the crate door. The mother Manul opened her eyes. For a long moment neither of them moved. Then something happened in the mother's posture, something subtle, something that was less a change than a releasing, the way a held breath releases, and she pressed her nose to the mesh from the other side. The room went completely still. Claire didn't move, barely breathed. Outside the storm was loud against the glass. Inside there was only this, 2 animals on either side of a wire door, touching noses in the dark, and the particular silence of a moment that doesn't need anything added to it. She must have slept eventually because she woke to gray morning light coming through the window, and a sore back and the sound of the storm finally quieting. She looked at the crate. The mother Manul was awake, upright, alert, both eyes open and fully focused, looking directly at Claire. Not at the door, not at the room, at her specifically, with that ancient flat-faced attention that she had come to recognize not as threat assessment, but as something quieter. Something that didn't have a clean name but felt, in this particular moment, in this particular light, like the closest thing to acknowledgement she'd ever received from a wild creature. Claire didn't move, neither did the mother. And for the first time since Claire had entered that ravine, since she'd stood in the snow reading what had happened there, since she'd understood what this animal had done and what it had cost her, she felt the pressure behind her eyes that meant she was about to cry. She didn't try to stop it. Recovery is not a single moment. It doesn't arrive cleanly the way stories sometimes suggest. A threshold crossed, a corner turned, a morning where everything is simply different. It comes in small increments that you almost miss individually and only understand looking back. A degree of steadiness in the breathing, an animal that yesterday refused food accepting it today without drama. Eyes that yesterday held the flat opacity of pure survival beginning, slowly, to hold something else. The mother Manul recovered the way she had done everything else Claire had observed, on her own terms, at her own pace, without asking for anything, and without offering anything she hadn't decided to offer. Marcus came every other day for the first 2 weeks. He was cautious and honest, and never oversold what he saw. Progress was real but fragile. The laceration along her flank closed cleanly, the dehydration resolved, the unevenness in her movement improved, and then improved again, and then one morning was simply gone. She remained wild throughout all of it. She ate when she chose to eat. She watched the room with the continuous assessment of something that had not changed its fundamental nature, simply because its circumstances had. When Marcus worked near the crate, she tracked every movement with her eyes and her ears and the set of her shoulders in a way that made clear she was tolerating this, not accepting it, that the line between the two was something she was drawing and redrawing daily. Claire respected this. She gave the mother space and quiet and consistency. She kept the back room dim. She kept her own movements in that space slow and predictable. She didn't speak to her the way people speak to domestic animals, with the particular coaxing warmth that assumes a desire for closeness. She simply existed nearby, calmly, without agenda, and the mother watched her, and slowly, across days that accumulated into weeks, the watching changed its quality. Outside the back room the cabin remained completely ungovernable. 5 Manul kittens in an enclosed space for an extended winter was not something Claire had prepared for practically or emotionally, and she had made her peace with that fact. The shelves had been reorganized 3 times after structural incidents she preferred not to examine too closely. She had accepted that certain items, gloves, lens caps, anything small and portable, now existed in a state of permanent relocation and were to be treated as borrowed rather than owned. They had distinct personalities, which she hadn't expected. Ghost remained the observational one, quiet, watchful, always positioned at the highest available point in whatever room it occupied. The smallest of the four, she'd started calling her Dot, was the most audacious, the first to attempt anything, the one most likely to be found somewhere genuinely alarming. The other three existed on a spectrum between these poles, and she had names for all of them now, quiet private names she hadn't told Marcus because she understood the look he would give her. She documented everything. Not the way she had shot photographs before, with the calculating eye of someone building a portfolio, framing for impact, thinking about placement and market. She shot the way she had when she first started, years before the career took over, because something in front of her was extraordinary and she wanted to hold it. She photographed Ghost on the windowsill watching snow fall, perfectly still, the gray fur and gray sky nearly continuous. She photographed Dot attempting something inadvisable on the top shelf of the bookcase, expression utterly committed. She photographed the 4 kittens sleeping in a pile near the fireplace, a tangle of dense fur and tucked paws, and slow breathing. And one evening, with the light coming low and gold through the back room window, she photographed the mother Manul sitting upright in the open crate door. Marcus had begun leaving it open during the day, watching the kittens visible through the doorway with an expression that was not readable in any human framework but was unmistakably, completely present. That photograph was the best thing she'd made in years. She knew it immediately. The day the mother Manul first came fully out of the back room on her own, Claire was at the kitchen table editing and did not notice for several minutes. She became aware of a stillness in the room that was different from ordinary stillness, the specific quality of air in a space where something is being very careful. She looked up slowly. The mother was standing at the far end of the kitchen, low, weight slightly back, ears in the neutral position that had come, over these weeks, to mean something different from what it had meant at the beginning. She was looking at the kittens. Dot was on the kitchen counter, which was not permitted and was a rule Dot treated as a creative suggestion. The other 3 were engaged in something complicated near the boot rack. Ghost was on top of the refrigerator, looking down at the mother with the philosophical calm it brought to most situations. The mother stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at all of this for a long time. Then she sat down. Not a retreat, not a collapse, a decision, the particular controlled descent of an animal choosing to be in a place. Dot noticed her first, froze on the counter, stared with enormous eyes, then came down from the counter, voluntarily, without being removed, and crossed the kitchen floor and stopped 2 feet from the mother and sat down. They regarded each other. The mother leaned forward and touched her nose briefly to the top of Dot's head. Dot's eyes went very wide, and she sat absolutely motionless for 3 full seconds, which was the longest Claire had ever seen Dot motionless for any reason. Then the other 3 came over. Then Ghost descended from the refrigerator with the careful dignity it applied to all vertical transitions and joined the loose cluster on the kitchen floor. Claire did not take a photograph. Some things you don't reach for a camera for. Some things you just let happen in front of you and hold without a frame. The weeks that followed were the strangest and most unexpectedly full of her life in years. Full in the literal sense. The cabin was never quiet now, never still, never the carefully maintained emptiness she had shaped her days around. There was always movement, always sound. The particular chirping vocalizations the kittens used with each other, the occasional low murmur from the mother, the sound of small things being knocked from surfaces, paws on wood floors, the thump of something landing from a height. And underneath all of it, steady and quiet and present the way foundations are present, something she recognized slowly, and then all at once as happiness. Not the performed version she'd chased in her old life. Not the temporary relief of a good assignment, or a productive day, or a relationship that was working for a season, the quieter kind. The kind that isn't contingent on anything external going right. The kind that comes from being exactly where you are and finding it, unexpectedly, sufficient. She called her sister for the first time in 8 months. She didn't explain much. She said she was okay. She said she'd been busy. She said she'd send some photographs. Her sister called back 20 minutes later and said, "Claire, what is happening up there?" Marcus brought the formal release assessment paperwork on a Tuesday in late March. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and his forms and explained what he explained to everyone in this situation, that wild animals are not pets, that successful rehabilitation means return to habitat, that the goal from the beginning had been always to reach this point. Claire listened to all of this and said, "I know. The mother is fully recovered. Her movement is normal. Her weight is appropriate. She is by every measure ready." "I know," Claire said again. Marcus looked at her carefully. "How are you?" She thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet." He nodded like that was the right answer. She opened the outer enclosure door on a Thursday morning. She didn't make an event of it, no gathering, no particular preparation. She simply opened the door that led from the protected outdoor shelter to the yard and the tree line beyond, and stepped back and waited. The mother appeared in the opening 20 minutes later. She stood at the threshold and looked out at the yard, the snow-covered open ground, the tree line, the mountains beyond, with an attention that was different from the attention she'd given in closed spaces. Something in her posture changed, something lengthened. She stood there for a long time. Then she stepped out into the snow. She moved across the yard without hurrying, stopped once and turned and looked back at the cabin with that flat ancient gaze, then continued to the tree line. At the edge of the trees she stopped again, turned again, then stepped between the pines and was gone. The kittens went in the days that followed. Not all at once, not dramatically. One morning there were 4 instead of 5, then 3. The mother came back twice in the first week. Claire saw her at the tree line at dusk, watching the cabin, and each time she came the number in the cabin decreased the following morning. Ghost went last. Of course Ghost went last. It was a morning in early April, light coming clean and cold through the windows, the mountains sharp against a sky that had finally remembered it was supposed to be blue. Claire came downstairs and made coffee, and stood at the window and looked at the empty yard, then looked at the room. Ghost was on the kitchen table, where it was not supposed to be and had never once stopped being, watching her with those amber eyes that had watched her since the night of the storm, since she'd pulled it out from under the ice, since the beginning of all of this. She didn't say anything. She opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch in her socks and her coat, and stood in the cold morning with her coffee. Ghost came to the door, sat in the opening, looked at the yard, looked at her, looked at the yard. She didn't say go, she didn't say stay. She didn't say anything at all because there was nothing to say that would have been adequate or necessary. Ghost stepped off the porch into the snow, crossed the yard without looking back, and disappeared into the tree line. The cabin was very quiet. She stood on the porch for a long time after. The mountains were doing what mountains do in early April, shifting through colors as the light moved, the snow on the high ridges going from white to gold, to a brief impossible pink as the sun came fully up. She thought about Chicago, about the assignment she'd turned down in February without fully examining why, about the photograph of the mother Manul in the crate doorway that had been accepted by a wildlife conservation journal and was going to run in the summer issue. She thought about the scratching at the truck tire, the flashlight in the storm, the tiny broken cry under the wind. How close she'd come to not opening the door. She went inside, washed her cup, sat at the desk and opened her laptop and began, for the first time, writing something that wasn't a caption or a location note, but an actual account, the whole thing from the beginning. She wrote for 3 hours without stopping. She saw the first track 4 days later, small, round, right outside the front door on the fresh snow of the porch. She stood over it for a moment, then another, beside the boot rack, then a third near the porch steps. She looked up slowly at the yard. They were at the tree line, all of them, the mother, low and still, watching the cabin, the kittens around her in various postures of alert interest, Ghost slightly separate from the group, sitting upright, watching Claire specifically with the particular attention that had always felt, somehow, like recognition. Claire stood on the porch in her socks. She went inside, got the food she kept in the cabinet now out of a habit she hadn't examined too carefully, came back out, set it at the edge of the porch, stepped back. The mother crossed the yard first, slow and deliberate, the way she did everything. She came to the porch edge and looked at Claire from 3 feet away, and the look was not soft and it was not warm in any way that borrowed from human ideas of warmth, but it was steady, and it was present, and it was something. She ate. The kittens came in behind her in a rush and chaos that somehow managed to be simultaneously wild and deeply familiar, and the quiet yard filled with movement and small sounds, and the particular energy of a family that is exactly where it has decided to be. Ghost came last, jumped onto the porch in one clean motion, sat beside Claire's feet, did not ask to be touched, did not make any sound, simply sat there in the morning light with its fur ruffled by the thin April wind and its amber eyes half closed against the brightness. Wild, completely, entirely wild. And here, summer came slowly to the mountains that year, the way it always did, reluctantly, in stages, the snow retreating up the slopes over weeks before finally releasing the high ground to the brief green season. Claire was on the porch one morning in June with her coffee when she took the photograph she would eventually use for the journal cover. She didn't know that yet. She was just sitting in the early light with the mountains behind the trees going gold, and the yard doing what the yard did now every morning, alive with the particular organized chaos of 5 Manul kittens who were no longer really kittens, moving through the space they had decided was part of their world. The mother was at the far edge of the yard, sitting in a patch of early sun, watching everything with her permanent ancient attention. Ghost was beside Claire on the porch rail, not touching her, just there, the way it had always been, just there. She took the photograph, then she put the camera down and drank her coffee, and somewhere in the quiet of that morning, in the sound of the wind off the mountains and the small movements of wild animals going about their lives in the yard below, and the particular quality of light at that elevation at that hour, she understood something she'd been moving toward for a long time without knowing where she was going. She hadn't come up here to disappear, she'd come up here to be found. I thought I rescued one dying little Manul that winter. But somehow, he came back and filled my empty life with an entire wild family.